Hello and welcome back to the second half of our first day of the conference. And I'd like to introduce one of my favourite photographers for many reasons. And I think it was maybe 3 years ago when I came down to Glasgow to talk with Thomas Joshua Cooper in an interview that I think was supposed to last half an hour, and we were there for about 5 hours chatting at the end of the day. And the amount of anecdotes, the amount of stories, and it's wrong in many ways to think about Thomas Joshua Cooper as just a photographer. He is an adventurer. He embodies the subjects that he photographs, and he's more of a geographer without geography.
Yeah, very much more.
And I'll let Thomas speak for himself. So if we can give a round of applause to Thomas Joshua Cooper.
Is this working? I don't think
it should be working.
Can anybody hear me? Oh, great. I can't hear myself. It's probably useful. It always unnerves me if anybody applauds before I speak, because the anticipation that you may not do so afterwards becomes truly overwhelming. I don't do this very often, and over the course of the day, that is to talk formally, it seems that those that know me will say I never shut the fuck up, but that's life. It's in part because I am an absolute total solitaire. And since 2010, this is only the 5th time I've ever done a talk, and the last one was 3 years ago, almost to the day. From 2010 till 2013, over what is a 4-year period, a group of things occurred to me that changed me and impelled me more completely than it might have previously to withdraw from more or less social circumstance and entirely devote myself to work. So a series of professional, personal and private weirdnesses led me to conclude that time to remove myself entirely from the social world and devote it entirely to work. I have a group of things that it's not even a bucket list, it's such bullshit. By the way, I speak as a West Coast American, so if anybody takes offense at the language that I'm going to perpetrate, please know it won't bother me if you leave. Because you're stuck. I'm obviously a Yank, fuck. I've lived in Britain for longer than I lived in America, and for the last 36 years I've been a permanent resident in Scotland, living happily and amazingly still married, as the saying goes, to my first wife, in Glasgow. It's amazing she hasn't dumped me for a younger model. There's so many out there. I think I read. Reading is the thing that gets me through almost everything. I read all the time. I'm subnormally slow at reading, and I can't count past 5 reliably, so it's a kind of a weird thing, but I can do 3 kind of conclusively. In 1900, a man named Alexander Carmichael published a project called the Carmina Gadelica, which the subtitle is the Gallic Songs, Hymns, and Incantations, that he spent the previous 35 years compiling. It is one of the sweet, great, sometimes impenetrable books. It's, wrist rest thing. And there's a part of it that an incantation, really. The clan chiefs in old Scotland were notoriously aggravational, and it, at the drop of a pin, didn't take much for clansmen to attack each other, let alone those that were not part of their clans. And the thing that I'm going to read you was originally offered by a clan chief to incite good wishes. So here we are, good wishes. Power of raven be thine. Power of eagle be thine. Power of the Fian. Power of storm be thine. Power of moon be thine. Power of sun. Power of sea be thine. Power of land be thine. power of heaven. Goodness of sea be thine. Goodness of earth be thine. Goodness of heaven. Each day be joyous to thee. No day be grievous to thee. Honor and compassion. Love of each face be thine. Tolerance of each heart be thine. Peace between all. As a foreigner in a strange place, I'm not used to these things. It seemed like the right way to say, thank you for having me. I'm amazed. It's been 30 years since I've been to something like this. And how enticing and alluring and also passingly frightening to be allowed proximity to at least the edge of such a lovely, warm-hearted, compassionate community as I feel I have begun to see. So, welcome and good wishes. It also dawned on me that, relatively speaking, I'm in Wordsworth territory. So, thought maybe we should start with Wordsworth. As I hate the word landscape, by the way, so I'm not going to use it. It really pisses me off. It's an academic term. You're outdoors or you're indoors. So I make outdoor pictures, and I make them in the two areas that I call the near field and the far field. The near field's more or less domesticated outdoors, and far field's way the fuck away. Wild. Wordsworth understood a little of that. So this is the first stanza from a very famous, really famous thing that he wrote just down or up or around the road. There was a time when meadow, grove, and stream, the earth and every common sight to me did seem apparelled in celestial light, the beauty and the freshness of a dream. It is not now as it hath been of yore. The things that I have seen, or turn whereso I may, the things I have seen, I now can see no more. It's the first stanza from the Ode on the Intimations of Immortality. It's an elegy. And I guess that's kind of appropriate because the things that I kind of do, I'm talking like my daughters, kind of, they're elegiac, and I understand that. They always have been. I think I was never young, but I didn't know that. And now that I'm old, I think, wow, fuck, I finally found the shell that I fit in. And one other thing before I begin. There was an old nun, it turns out Middle Eastern nun, a Sufi gal, who said something that blew my mind that I found in writing, that sort of encompasses the way that I feel about the entirety of my experiences, which have been more or less out of body, listening to people talk and meeting people. I don't know why I'm here, but by the way, if you get tired of this horseshit, just doodle. But she said, and it made so much sense to me because I at least understood it's about stages of life. And she said, the stages are first bewilderment. I got that one. Second, then need. I got that one too. Then union. I'm not sure what she's talking about. And then, quite wonderfully, bewilderment once again. I understand that. So here we go. I've been working on one project. I'm a project-based artist. I am an artist who makes photographs. I really get tense, and it's my problem, not yours. I get tense using the vernacular shoot and take. It's just English. It's your language, not mine. I'm also a second language. American isn't English. But the fact is, whatever you call yourself, a photographer, which is a big noun, or an artist who makes photographs, lots of words, smaller noun. The issue is about seeing and thinking and making things. Makers create stuff that wasn't there before they made them. Takers remove shit that probably should have never been removed and never put it back. And that's not good, you know? It's just not good. There's too much of that. So that's my little soapbox for you guys. I'm a picture maker and a storyteller. I've been working exclusively on a project that I have finally found myself able to call the Atlas, not an, the one and only, there will never be another, the Atlas of emptiness and extremity. Somewhere between 1987 and 1990, I came up with an idea that, sorry I'm shaking so much, is this the button? Oh, it is. By the way, that's me. My motto, I'm not obnoxious, I'm just tact challenged. And by the way, for those of you who may not know, there's a wonderful, slightly weird American artist who makes 2024 Polaroids of his dog named William Wegman. Dog's various incarnations are Man Ray and Fay Ray and other Rays. And that's a devil dog. And in my better moments, I'm devil dog. And this is how I have always perceived myself, certainly as a young man. The piece, it's an artwork made by a very wonderful artist, cartoonist named Glenn Baxter, changed my life. And I first saw it when I first came to Britain and was privileged to become, allowed to become, a friend of Paul Hill's, who is really important to me emotionally. But I saw this and I thought, God, this is spectacular. Here's a cowboy, I came from the American West, addressing an empty painting, modernism. And of course, because he's a cowboy, the first thing he does, because he's a Western American, is he draws his pistol. You'll note he's got a holster, but there's no gun. Being a typical American, he draws the pistol, and of course, because he can't understand this thing that he is told is important, but can't find anywhere to shoot it and kill it because he doesn't understand it, and especially its importance, he drops his gun in astonishment. So most people's, I think, first encounter with most things that are unfamiliar. How do we kill it first? I want to talk to you about three things in the Atlas of Emptiness and Extremity. Sorry, shaking. The Atlantic Basin. From the North Pole, not all the way, but to the northern tip of Antarctica, is amazing. I think about it all the time. I started thinking about it in 1987. And I started thinking about it because I think almost weekly, sometimes daily, it's a pathetic bastard syndrome, about Fernand Magellan. In 1519, next year, the 500th anniversary of the voyage that changed the world more significantly than any other event, including Hiroshima and Nagasaki, including the development of movable type by, starts with a B, and I can't remember his name, I'll think of it, when Magellan circumnavigated the world. He created, unintentionally, but more or less, and of course he didn't quite live to get there when it happened, he created the advent and the opportunity, and on some level the cataclysmic possibility that we now call globalism. Single-handedly changed the world. Everything about the world no longer was separate. It was conjoined like twins. So I started thinking about this and started thinking, okay, wow, the Atlantic Basin, from the bottom to the top, the North and South Atlantic, the Arctic Ocean, the Drake Passage, the Southern Ocean, and several seas in between. I started trying to imagine, would it be possible from the extremities of what I call the old and classical worlds of Europe and Africa to stand with my back facing, my back behind, standing on the extreme points, the furthest cardinal points of the continental edges of the points from whence Western culture traveled across the Atlantic Ocean and inhabited itself into the New World, and where I became a recipient of it. This peculiarly elastic, plastic, amazing thing called Western culture. You guys helped invent it. I just got a little receipt of it. Quite extraordinary. And I thought, well, maybe. I thought, okay, I'll try and do this. I didn't realize until much towards the end of a project that I have not been able to complete. I'll talk about that later, but have concluded no hydrographer, no geologist, no geographer can categorically say what the circumference of the Atlantic basin is. No one knows. They have because of the tidal changes in inlets and especially with the start of global warming, the waters are not actually entirely measurable. But for purposes of approximation, the circumference of the Atlantic basin is 70,000 miles in circumference. I've traveled all but 1,500 miles and 3.5 degrees, which is even more pissy because 3.5 degrees is only 210 nautical miles of the Atlantic basin. And the project I'm working on will conclude the Atlas of Emptiness and Extremity in September 2019, when a very sweet museum in Los Angeles called the Los Angeles County Museum of Art produces this thing that I call the World's Edge, the Atlantic Basin Project. So that's all the intro bollocks that any one person can stomach. Everything begins. In 1987, I had this thought with the companion who shortly afterwards became my wife about circumnavigation. I thought I could learn how to do something by, in a way, something that happens ordinarily, walk around. By the way, this is the right time to do this now, I detest, refuse, and actually think it's really a bad thing that the idea of, what is it? I've even forgotten the word. God, I'll think of it in a minute. Whatever isn't inspiration. What's the word that sounds like inspiration that isn't? I'll think of it. Influence. Influence, let me be clear, by its nature is a nasty power gaming thing. When the politicians use the phrase, and I'm saying this in relation to previous talks and in general, spheres of influence are only about weight of force in directing those who are not necessarily willing to follow and obey something they weren't entirely convinced by. Beware of influence. Shirk it if you can, refuse it at every possible instance, but trust entirely if you can trust anything. I have a hard time with that. Big trust issues. Trust inspiration. Inspiration is by nature benign. It's singular and individual. What inspires you might not inspire me, but it's entirely respectful. You receive it, generally speaking, with surprise and gratitude, and generally speaking, it's not harmful. And I really am interested in inspiration. I was inspired by a race car driver named A.J. Foyt, who over television, when I was a kid, discussed the beginning of when women became sports broadcasters on TV in America. Some slightly uncertain, poor, sad woman approached this difficult, nasty person who was a very famous Indy 500 race car winner, how he was going to run the next race. And he blew cigar smoke in her face. That's horseshit. She should have dropped him on the spot, but she didn't. And he clinched his cigar, being male macho bullshit. But he said two words that changed my life. Flat out. And then he said, I'm going to run it flat out. I thought, wow. Motto for life. Flat out. Do not stop. Do not hesitate. Keep going. Next, inspiration. Obviously, everybody loves him. The old Kurosawa guy, Seven Samurai, great movie. I was inspired by one of the smallest characters in the film. This guy who maybe in a total of, whatever, hour and a half to 2 hours, is on screen for approximately 12 minutes. And it's this very quiet, thin guy who spends all his time practicing pulling his sword and doing movements. And then somebody doesn't think he's worth much and calls him out. And the guy refuses to be called. And anyway, he finally ends up being insulted enough that he's called out. And he dispatches the person who's called him out with one swipe. The issue wasn't the killing. The issue was practice, 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 practice. Do everything, however apparently repetitive, over and over and over. Next inspiration, Miles Davis. I started to try and understand tunes. I love Danzel, but not I don't know shit about classical things. Tunes. And I started to listen. And I started to understand that there's tunes, if you will, in your head. And part of the joy is not just the tune, but how well and how differently you can play the tunes over and over and over. And then how you can find new tunes and play them differently and well over and over through practice. And then 2 poets and 3 painters and 3 photographers. A Japanese poet named Basho, an American lyric poet named Theodore Roethke, painters, Morris Graves, nobody knows these names, Monet, Claude Monet, and Mark Rothko, taught me about how things could be built. And then 3 photographers. All of this group, including the racing car driver, I designate as artists. First Stieglitz, because I'm a romantic swine and I love the late shit. And then Weston, whose late Point Lobos things just killed me. I lost words. But most of all, this American guy who only practiced for 7 years in the American wilderness named Timothy H. O'Sullivan, who made pictures that were only comparable to Cézanne's at, as it turns out, from previous things, Mont Saint-Victoire. So, and I thought, can photographers do shit like this? Well, in the first place, why would you want to? But I kind of wanted to. And I spent a lifetime trying to figure out how to do something that maybe the medium doesn't naturally allow. But anyway, so introduction. First pictures. I thought, my future wife and I thought, we live in Glasgow. What does Glasgow look like? I don't know. Mainly it's not very nice. I mean, it's just an ugly working town. It's interesting, it's lively. But we thought we'd circumnavigate it. And found over 3 weeks it was 428 miles in circumference, and that of all 4 quadrant sections, north, south, east, west, there was, in the city boundaries, it was landscape. Horrible word. The picture on the left was made at 7:30 in the morning on New Year's Day, 1987, with an exposure. The exposure was so long, there was a deer, a stag. I was so excited. This goddamn deer walks in front of the picture, and I think, wow, I'm going to get a deer ghost. But it was such a long exposure that deer happily passed through, unremarked upon. And then the picture on the right, things happen. I'm led by feeling things, and I made a decision that either I could stay in Scotland and make pictures and work, or I would have to leave and, personal shit, and go back to America. So the way I solved most of my problems, including up to today, is there was a spot above Oban on the west coast of Scotland, where in the Firth of Lorne. And it's a clear shot, if you want to, that you can look either towards Scotland or look further northwest towards America. And I waded into the Firth up with my camera. So I work with one camera, only ever, since 1969. 5x7 Agfa Ansco, made in New York, 5x7 field camera, Agfa and Ansco, German Agfa, English Ansco, combined in the late 19th century to compete with Eastman, and were wiped out by 1920. In the interim, however, they made a group of cameras and films. And there are about 20 of mine still left of my type. So 1898, in 1969, bought the camera from the 70-year-old son. I'm now 2 years older than the son. From the original owner, who they'd traveled from New York to California. He became a studio photographer, and I bought the studio when he retired. So I'm in the Firth of the Lorne, and the deal was, if I make a picture looking towards America, I leave, and if I make a picture, which this is called, looking towards Scotland, I stay. These began the 30-year project of the Atlas of Emptiness and Extremity. This, like I say, I read a fair bit, and this text by Cormac McCarthy, who I love Bob Dylan, but it pissed me off so much that he got the Nobel Prize, because I thought, well, there's one more American that's got it, and that leaves Gold Cormac further down the trail. But he's a wonderful, scary outdoor writer. The world has no name, he said. The names of the cerros, the valleys, and the sierras, the mountains, and the deserts exist only on maps. We name them that we do not lose our way, yet it is because the way was lost to us already that we made those names. The world cannot be lost. We are the ones. It is because these names and these coordinates are our naming that they cannot save us, that they cannot find for us the way again. My entire body of work is predicated on that little notion. So here we go. I started out, I had this thought early on, Tim very kindly, if I'd known there was such a thing as historical geography when I was a kid, I almost certainly would have jumped for that. I'm really interested in the way history and geography coincide. And I'm interested, as I call this thing, promise, allure, fear, to designate the promise of West, the promise, or the allure of North, and the fear of South. This kind of shit has a beginning, the ancient beginnings. And the very first beginning, the Greco-Roman, actually the Greco-Egyptian, early cartographer and geographer named Ptolemy, whose great book Geographica is still sort of a weird classic text, designated in 327 or AD, approximately, that the end of the world, as we know it, was the westmost point of the westmost island of the Canaries, which is El Hierro, and the westmost point, as we know now, is Punta Orchio, and he designated that the ancient 0-degree meridian longitude, the end of the world. So, of course, I had to go there to see what the end of the world looked like. And I'm looking due west, and it's called Moonrise over the end of the world, some kind of course, attempt at talking about other moonrises. In the 8th century, I've become, through a project that my wife has directed me towards and is leading, really interested in the Celtic peregrinati migration from Ireland to the west of Scotland. Peregrinati, Celtic saints, wandering saints, unlike the Romans. And one of the great ones, guy from whence this picture was made, St. Brandon of Ireland, who has latterly become the patron saint of navigators, really important to me, decided to do his wandering mendicant journeys on sea rather than on land. So he set off by coracle, and over time managed to hug the coasts of Europe and Africa, and got across to the Canary Islands. This is made from Brandon Point, looking at Brandon Bay near the westmost point of Ireland. Really great adventurer. Dear old Brandon's disciples, not so long after he croaked, wrote what could be said is an apology. It's called Navigatio. It's hard to read. But he is said, and it's weird, by the way, if he's also the patron saint of people born on the island of Bute in Scotland. They're called Brendanes if they're locally born. It's weird. He went everywhere, wandering. But it is reputed, could be horseshit, it probably was, but I liked it. Great story. It is reported that he, in a coracle-type boat, cast himself across the sea and managed to successfully reach the other end. And wow, there are two pictures from this group missing, and that he, in the Navigatio, there's a section that he describes, or is described by one of his disciples, that is more or less identical as to what happens when you round the northern tip of the Gulf of St. Lawrence into the Gulf of St. Lawrence. There's a little rock island right out of Arthur called Ile du Lac, the island of the lake. And everything about it is almost perfectly described 1,000 years before, 1,200 years before. But this is a point made at the northmost point of Lanzarote. He arrived almost certainly from the eastmost point of Lanzarote, pictures I don't have, cast himself off and went across. So ancient beginnings. The world was always known to be round. The bullshit about the flat world was only cuckoos, and most of them live in America now, by the way, and that becomes increasingly evident. And it's embarrassing, you know? God damn. Direction is metaphorical. It's not just cartographic, although I say not just, I am a devotee of the cartographs. Just a little treat. The most wonderful English atlas, the most thorough English reading atlas in the world is, without question, of all the atlases, and there's zillions of them, the Times Comprehensive Atlas of the World. If you like maps, and they sell it cheap at Christmas time sometime, it's worth buying. If you buy one atlas, big atlas in your life, buy that one because it's spectacular. And little did I know, HarperCollins, they publish it, they print it in Bishop Briggs, 6 miles out of Glasgow. There's a little something I think about, because I don't have anything else to do, I think about qualities of time. I've spent an entire working lifetime unconsciously, then intuitively, then really consciously trying to slow time down. There's a very beautiful title of a not so interesting book authored by German guys called The Invention of Slowness. It's actually about this stupid British guy named John Franklin, who I have no sympathy for him, the guy that tried to find the Northwest Passage and didn't prepare properly and everybody got killed in the late 19th century. Anyway, I'm interested in slowness, so I think about time. There are all kinds of time. Mainly, I'm interested in time that's human or comprehensible in human terms, but in some ways, sometimes not personal. So human time that's non-personal, eonic time, awareness of past ages. What is extraordinary is that less than 9 months ago, the World Geological Conference designated a new eon. We are in the era of the Anthropocene, the era of man, not males, humans. That we've fucked the world up so much we get our very own designation for it. And that's interesting. So I'm interested in eonic time. I'm interested in historical time, the time of major occurrence and event, chronological time, the time of day, hour, year, month. I'm interested in the time of life and a life of time as a maker and as an artist. And then in conditions and qualities of personal time, the time of your life, the time of my life, the time of our life, the time of memory, especially as mine is slipping, the time of forgetting, something I'm really good at, the time of youth, something I've long shed, the time of love, something I still know a little bit about, the time of anger, something I also unfortunately know something about, the time of fear, something I know more about day by day than I ever thought possible, the time of confusion, the time of suffering, the time of clarity, the time of tears, the time of laughter, the time of aging, the time of delight, the time of mortality, and the time of dying. In very oblique ways, and I'll quit reading bullshit, these are subject areas of my work. So, the promise of West. Promise, interesting, good word, I like it. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit what promise might mean. From the old Chambers Dictionary, I like it. Cardinal points are all metaphoric, north, south, east, west. I don't count east. The sailor, I'm afraid of water, I don't swim, and I work with water. It's kind of counterintuitive shit, but east we're not dealing with. Always follow the sun. Move west, move north, move south. East is behind you. Always follow the sun. Promise, a compact, a kind of unbreakable guarantee. An expectation, or that which raises expectation. A ground for hope. To encourage, to expect, to afford hopes or expectations. West is that promise. It has been since almost immemorial, and in every known written culture, the place of possibility. So what I thought I'd do is now get to the grit, is show you some pictures that I've made from all the Wests of all the continents surrounding the Atlantic Basin. Continental west of Europe, Cabo de Roca, Portugal. Looking west, of course. Northwest continental, southwest continental Europe, northwest Norway, southwest Cabo São Vicente at midnight, Portuguese, southwestmost point. All the continental, or all the great Renaissance explorers had to leave from that point. It's the sticky out bit most of Europe, and it was from that point that Magellan did his 24-hour vigil, which I reenacted and made pictures at Matins, Compline, Matins the next day. This is obviously midnight. Right, left hand, northwestmost Great Britain, Cape Wrath. What a great name. But what is even more wonderful, it's one of only 3 places in all of Europe that isn't way out in the sea, where if you stand on the edge of it, you can look due north and be unhindered by any land all the way to the North Pole. Imaginatively, how wonderful that is. The picture on the right, Land's End, totality, the total eclipse of the sun, 1999. I'd never seen anything like it. I prepared 4 days in advance to get to the end of the Land's End point. And by the time after 4 days later, there was thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. In totality, it was the weirdest thing. There were people all the way from Cape Cornwall to Land's End. And during totality, which only lasted maybe max 2 minutes, but possibly less than 90 seconds, I can't remember, somebody at Cape Cornwall took their camera, their telephone out and snapped a picture of blackness. And that triggered an entire arc of light from Cape Cornwall to Land's End, looking at absolute blackness. It was one of the most wonderful things I've ever seen. And their pictures, there won't be anything there, but I saw it. It was wonderful. The picture that began all this, the westmost point of Great Britain, Point Ardnamurchan on a force 7 gale. The westmost point of all Great Britain that isn't a rock, the Mistress Stone, Isle of St. Kilda, looking west towards America. The westmost actual point is that weird little rock that I can't think of the name of, that I've tried for 8 years to get to, but can't. I'll think of it. The westmost point of all Europe, from the island of Flowers in the Azores, looking towards America. I grew up in Northern California with groups of loggers whose kids all spoke English, American English and Portuguese, but the fathers, the mothers, and the grandfathers only ever spoke Azorean Portuguese, and they all came from the island of Flowers. I had to get there. The westmost point, one of 2, of continental Africa, one of the joys of my life. Clouded moonlight behind the barracks defending Dakar in Senegal. By the way, there's a little arrow pointing on the rock, painted on one of the, it's also a people trafficking point. Fuck. But if you get caught and you're a white boy, you get shot. It's really simple. That was, the previous was Cap Manuel. This is Punta Almadi, the absolute westmost point of continental Africa. It's important for whatever it's worth, although only perhaps to me. All my pictures are unique. I only ever make one exposure. There's only ever one. So if I fuck it up, I only find out when I get back to the darkroom months later and find out that I fucked it up. There's only one exposure ever, only. I don't make extras ever. So what you see is what you get. 5x7 picture that I make in 2 sizes or 3 sizes, 8x10s, 20/24s, and 30x40 inches, and I print everything. This is a 30x40 inch. I've never seen anything this big of mine. The northwestmost point of Africa in the Maghreb, Morocco. It's made just below one of the many hereditary lighthouses along the North African coast, and it's Punta Malabata. And the lighthouse keepers family, historically, they call it the door to the Mediterranean. I love it. I like lighthouse keepers. The southwestmost points of all Africa. On the left, first light over Africa, Cape of Good Hope. On the right, last light over Africa, Cape Point. One of 2 pictures westmost of all Africa, from the island of Santo Antão in the Cape Verde Islands, looking east towards South America. God, it's wonderful. I love it. If West is anything, and the promise of West is clear, it resides in something like this kind of a picture. Always, in a way, almost out there, Star Trek bullshit, over the rainbow is this promise of something better. Why do you think all of the people that don't want Britain to be in the United, if you will, states of Europe, of the European Union, why are they so frightened? Because we have what everybody else wants, and we don't want anybody else to have any bit of it at all. And that's slightly scary, because there's more of them than us, and it's better that we're a little bit more generous. The northwestmost on the left and the southwestmost points of South America. The northwestmost point called Cabo Ojo de Dios on the left. It's a water spout in moonlight in the top bit of Colombia. I just couldn't believe it. I'd never seen anything like it. First, I was amazed to see. I've never seen a water spout close up. And then the moonlight lit it up, and it just kept going for minutes. It's amazing. Ojo de Dios, no, Ojo de Agua, what am I talking about? South American Spanish for point of the eye of the water. It was designated for me to be a title of a book. The picture on the right-hand side, made from the southwestmost point, at the bottom, on a place called Desolation Island at the western mouth of the Strait of Magellan in a force 9 gale. And really, that was a bad scene. That was sinking territory. I was in a small boat. We were fucked. The allure of North. Everything about North is interesting in a way. It's out of reach. So it's an allure. It's enticing. To lure, if you're a fisherman. To offer or suggest desire or desirability. The great King Olaf of Norway, who Christianized the Scandinavian people, more or less, not by force, would appear, had this original plan that many of his followers and latter leads, some of the Danish kings as well, thought it would be a great idea to create an Arctic empire that, of course, in his case, was going to chop off a bit of Russia. The czars weren't too pleased about that, but was going to include Greenland and all of Scandinavia and, of course, Finland and a chunk of Russia. And he thought also Arctic Canada. Fantastic. This place where Thule, Thule, strange word, Greenland American Air Base, in Roman maps, Thule was this place as far north as you could imagine. I'm interested in the fact that there are only two absolute directions, north and south. The North Pole is the furthest north you can get, and if you get there, the only places you can look are south, southeast, southwest. You can't look anywhere else. And of course, south. They're absolute. West is relative. Sooner or later it becomes east, as does east become west. And I'm interested in the absolutes. I was fortunate enough to literally be able to hitch a ride on the flagship of the Russian icebreaker fleet. It's called the Yamal. It's the most powerful nuclear ship in the world. And the Yamal leads the Russian ice-breaking fleet in keeping the Northeast Passage open. They were sent on an errand, detestable. I'm not a Putin fan, by the way. Putin had sent, you'll perhaps recall, a two-person submarine down to the bottom of the North Polar ocean floor to claim the mineral rights for Russia. Polar Ocean, North Polar Arctic Ocean's 4,000 meters deep. And they did it. They came up, and the Yamal was sent to retrieve the sub. It's a big deal. I got lucky. I got a ride from Murmansk, a strange place. I'm left on my own. I've never been anywhere like this in the world. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was thrilled. Fuck, the North Pole. Wow, I got there. There's no land. It's ice on water. And I saw what I thought was going to be this picture, and I stopped looking at my feet and looked up, and I fell through the sea ice with my 16-kilo tripod on my back. Everything's in pelican cases, Peli cases, so nothing got damaged there, but it was a 4,000-meter drop. And that was a bad deal. I went under and I popped up, and by the way, the water is 1 or 2 degrees, max 3, and ultimately strangely warmer than the surface. And there's these things called sastrugi, which are what happens when the ice cracks and the wind and the currents push them together and they create ice ridges. And there was one, fortunately, within arm's reach, and it didn't break when I reached out, grabbed anxiously for it, and I slung the tripod off, and I, over some time, got out. I'm freezing, and I'm turning literally into a walking ice sheet, and I see what I think is the curvature of the Earth at the horizon. And I thought, I've got to go. I've got to make the picture. I've got to go. So I climbed the bit that saved my life, this bit of ice chunk, and made this picture, and then fled back to the ship where I had to be resuscitated. Weird shit. I don't like water. I don't like boats. I hate boats. Ships are great because they've got bathrooms and beds, and you get a meal. Boats are bad deals for somebody like me. The two pictures are 89 degrees looking north, and a degree is 60 nautical miles. And the one on the right is 90 degrees, North Pole, looking south. The Yamal is the only ship I've ever been on. I've only been on 3, a zillion boats. Because it's nuclear powered, there's no shutter. It froze itself in, and it was completely still. And fuck, I had a vantage point for the first time on a gigantic 127,000 horsepower. For me, that's a lot of horsepower for a boat. and it didn't move, and I was able to make these pictures. The northmost bit of all the land in the world. It's not just the top of Greenland, which is Cap Morris Jessup. I've worked from there. It's lovely. But there's two little tidal islets. The main one that I'm standing on, looking towards the one that I couldn't actually stand on, is called Coffee Club. Only the Danes call the northmost bit of land in the world Coffee Club Island, looking towards Inuit Island. Inuit's slightly, there's only a very small tide in the Arctic Ocean. I tried to stand, it was 5 feet underwater, and I tried to stand. I couldn't find my feet, so I made this the last land in the world, northmost. I tried over 5 years to reach the northmost point of North America. Planned. It cost a lot of money to do this. Backer had a decent relationship with. And 2 weeks before the final attempt to do what was the last 3.5 degrees, 1,500-mile trip to do 10 miles, he pulled out. This is as far north as I could get in North America. It's called Lament. It's Nares Strait, and just below the Lincoln Sea, which has never unfrozen even now. It's still frozen. Nobody's seen these pictures, so they're new. I spent all of 2007 and 2008 between the North Pole and the South Pole, and most of between 2010 and 2015 in the high Arctic. I don't know why I like it. This is well north of the North Polar Circle in Canada. It's called Cap Wolstenholme. And I think of Sisyphus a lot, the poor bastard Greek guy that had to roll the rock up and down. He pissed the gods off, and every time it got near the floor, it rolled itself back up. He had to roll it back up. I'm really interested in the fact that almost all celestial things are deemed to be perfect. Circles, for instance, the polar circle, the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, the equator, indeed the poles themselves. But because they're planetary, as it turns out, as well, invisible but still planetary, they're also eccentric. And I like to think that if Sisyphus was rolling a rock, which I think most of us, me anyway, think of as round, it's actually something as difficult to move as that. The North Polar Circle at the top of Hudson Bay, called Repulse Bay on the left, looking into the sun, and at one of the hardest places to get to in North America, the eastmost point of Baffin Island, Cape Dyer in the Arcs. Part of the pleasure of my work for me is how to make something terrestrial and visible out of things that are celestial, essentially, and invisible. That's exciting. It's also kind of strange. I'm interested in historical geography, where and how the history of colonization, which of course is not a great thing if you're the place being colonized, brought the civilization that I've inherited to the place that I lived in. This is a site in the northern tip of Newfoundland called La Anso Meadow, and it's at the spring equinox, the first ice flow I'd ever seen. It's the exact site where Leif Erikson overwintered in the year 1000 to become the first European to set public foot on North American New World territory. This little bit of wonderful ridge rock is also an exact point. This is the exact point that in 1498, these pictures aren't about just the place. There is no place in the world that is not peopled. I don't have any people in my pictures, but every single one of them is filled, imbued with something that comes from being imagined or being touched by the locals, by the fucking animals, by the imagination. Anyway, John Cabot reached this point and declared, the newfound land in 1498. 6 years after Columbus. I like this picture. This is from a point in Newfoundland called Cape Race, and it's the site of the first land-based distress message of the Titanic. And they're granite pinnacles. It is absolutely 100% for sure that the Titanic was doomed. Had it reached the coast, it would have foundered on these granite pinnacles and been lost in any case. It was a bad game for them. Northmost of all Europe, Russian, Chermside Island at the northmost point of the Svalbard archipelago, which we saw from the beautiful, I love the previous talk, and the map made me happy. Looking north on a 1,200 foot high cliff side. And then in Norway, the northmost point of continental Europe, it's called Knivskjell. Forgive my weird, unpronounceable Norwegian. I met a couple of people from Iceland who've been very gracious to me. The northmost point of Iceland at the polar circle. The northmost point of Ireland, Malin Head, during a storm. It's always stormy at Malin Head. The northmost point of all Great Britain, the top of the island of Unst in the Shetlands, on both sides of the island. The northmost point of mainland Great Britain in Scotland. I wanted to see if I could make rock float. Really pleased me. I did. The northmost point of continental United States. There's only one point in all of continental America that's north of the 49th parallel, the divider line between Canada and America. Thomas Jefferson muscled the Canadians in 1803, approximately, maybe 1802, to cede a territory known as the Lake of the Woods to America. It's a little blip just at 49, so it's a couple of seconds north of 49. Because he thought, erroneously, that that lake was the source of the Mississippi, but he got it. And I'm standing on this the ubiquitous thing, American island, looking north at sudden nightfall. The northmost point of Africa. It's in Tunisia. Poor, amazing, wonderful. The Maghreb is wonderful. Africa scared me, a white boy, and African friends that became kind to me later said, look, man, we could see you were yanked from 500 yards. That's probably not to your advantage. And what can you do? It's wonderful. In Arabic, it's called Ras Angela, the Cape of the Angels. And it's between three hereditary houses, and none of the lighthouse keepers, whose history of their working lives had been to keep those lighthouses going, knew where it was. No one knew where the northmost point of the continent was. I spent 2 weeks with my guide and the GPS hunting around for the exact northmost point of Africa between lighthouse keepers who should have known this, and we finally found it. I was so happy. I brought all the 3 lighthouse men and their families, and we had a giant picnic here, and I made this picture. It's totally, no one knows it's there. The northmost point of the Canary Islands. The water that's to the top of the picture is a wave, and it came over the rock and me very shortly after the making of the picture. The northmost point of continental South America. It's a place called Punta Gallinas. Weirdly, it's Rooster Point. It's very uninteresting. It's in the Guajira, province of Guajira, and within the tribal territory of the Guajiran Indians. They are, without question, the most violent tribal people in South America. It's touched that maybe the San Blas people in southwestern Panama are equal, but it's a matriarchal society. No man may speak to a woman. It's probably a good deal in that sense for the women. No man can speak to a woman without asking for consent. And no stranger can look at a woman without incurring serious jeopardy. My guide allowed me to see the grandmother. The village that I needed to stage my approach from was 357 miles south, and we arranged that I would be taken by, I thought, 3 adults in a 12-foot motorboat up the west coast of Caribbean, Colombia, to the top of the continent. We arranged to meet at 10:30 at night, and there's 2 old guys, I'm not old, but middle-aged guys, carrying, as they all do, carrying machine guns and machetes. And this kid and my guide and myself. And we say hello, and the first thing I'm told is, don't speak to the boy, don't touch the boy. Fuck, okay. He was the pilot. His name was Paulo. He was 12 years old. He couldn't read. He was the best navigator of the tribe, and they sent him. He navigated us to over 12 hours to within 50 meters dead true north by stars. And he'd never been there. Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan Kenobi. Absolutely fantastic. Weird aside, I'm making this picture and I've pissed them off. It's taken too long. We have to get back. The kid's getting tired. He's been up for 12 hours and we had another 12 getting back. And one of the tios, the uncles, taps me on the shoulder and I'm under the dark cloth on. Yeah. It doesn't say anything. And I said, okay. And he just uses his thumb. Go. And I said, I need to make this. So I make the picture. He's reluctant. And then I think, okay, maybe he'll look. And I look at him and with my hand offer him. I said, take his hand. Would you like to look under the dark cloth? Remember, all my pictures are upside down and backwards. Weird out-of-body experience anyway. And he did, and he allowed me to put the dark cloth over him. And he just stood motionless for about 3 minutes. No, I couldn't even hear him breathe. I was standing right next to him. He put the dark cloth back. It was really sweet. I don't experience this very often. He sort of smiled and then walked off. Fuck, it was very nice. Fear of South. Ooh, South. Fuck. South's a killer in every possible way. We're frightened of everything. Everything that's come for Europe is in some way Southern. Every single thing is Southern. Fear, a painful emotion excited by danger. That which causes alarm, to terrify, to reverence, to expect with fear, alarm, to be anxious or in fear of or about, to stand in awe of, to venerate.
30 minutes.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. We're going to end at the first ending of this. The southmost point of Greenland, the cape that is so beautiful that I was drawn to it even when I didn't think I could get anywhere else. It's called Cape Farewell. Wonderful. Impossible wonderful. The southmost point of Canada. It's hard to believe Canada has a southmost point. God, I love it. The southmost point of Ireland. The southmost point of Great Britain. The southmost point of continental Europe, which of course isn't Sicily because it's not continental. Southmost point of continental Europe is Tarifa in Spain, one of the great windsurfing points. It's only 17 miles across the channel of the Med, and windsurfers do this suicidal thing of dodging container ships for fun. It's weird. Containers don't stop, by the way. They just go over you. I loved it. Southmost point of continental United States. Key West looking towards Cuba, the last light. I loved Cuba. The southmost point of all Africa, low tide, Cape Agulhas on the left, South Africa, high tide, Cape Agulhas, South Africa. Moving further south, moonlight on the Tropic of Cancer on the Mexican west coast, Caribbean coast. That's a picture. Remember, there's only one of these fuckers each. I think a lot, because of backgrounding shit that I am sort of born with, about what happens when visitors visit with malintent. You may think that's what I'm doing right now. I apologize for that. I've worked quite extensively along the Atlantic coastlines of the continents of South America, Central America, the Caribbean, all the way up to near the top. And I thought a lot about Cortez, miserable bastard. I'm standing on the site, one of 4 or 5 proposed. This is, for me, after reading a lot, probably the most likely, just north of Veracruz, a city that Cortez founded in 1519, where he began the invasion of Mexico, which within 39 days erased the Aztec culture from the face of the earth. I call the picture erasure. South, in Central America, in Honduras, where everybody's trying to get out of, and man, I can understand it. Just south of Cape Honduras is another cape called Cabo Gracias a Dios, which Columbus named on his 3rd voyage in 1496 or 97, whenever the 3rd voyage was. It's a cape that's so full of shoals and hidden rocks, and it's just hard. He spent 2 or 3 weeks trying to round it. He finally got around it, and out of gratitude named it Thank You God Cape. You'll all know about the Act of Union, 1707. England and Scotland become joined. One should say at the head or the hip, but they become joined. A pretty interesting thing. It's called I think it's interesting. Some people think it's horrible. Why did that happen? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is that stuff happened in Central America in 1702 that changed Scotland forever. Scotland tried to enter the colonial race. They went to southwest Panama and established the colony of Darien. It is within the tribal enclosures of the San Blas tribe. They're remarkably hostile people to this day, and rightfully so. And they established Darien. The point I am standing on is called Puerto, the village, Escocias. And the water is Bahia Escocés, the Bay of Scotland. Within 1 year, the entire colony was wiped out, and Scotland lost 35% entirely in 1702-03 of their entire GDP. They were, as a country, on the edge of bankruptcy, and of course, the English king, just blanked on his name, saw a chance and made a proposition. We'll bail you out, but sign on the dotted line, brother. And thus the Act of Union. And this is true history, by the way. One little wild screw up. And it's hard to imagine that a contemporary country, which Scotland was, I'm not could lose that much of its national income in one absolutely catastrophic adventure. The great thing about it is that colonial historians, and latterly people like myself, believe that this single event, the failure of Darien, began the beginning of the end of colonial history as we know it, and for that it must be blessed. The southmost point of Panama on the border of Colombia, there is no border, and it's from a point called Cabo Tiburon, the Cape of the Shark. And if you go there, it's a hamlet, and everybody's carrying firearms and machetes, and my guide said, look, don't look at anybody. Don't talk to anybody. go and make the picture. I will have your back. Make the picture, and then let's really get the hell out of here as quick as possible, because this is a major drug trade thing, because there's no guards. These two pictures, left and right, Columbus's first landing point in the Caribbean on the island of San Salvador on the left, and then on Long Island, his second landing point in October 1492, and then 2 weeks later. I'm happy with this. I very happily got a cultural visa to go to Cuba. I circumnavigated it 4,000 miles. And this picture I made at the revolutionary landing site that Fidel, Che, and Raul Castro and the men of 86. There were 86 people came across from Mexico near Veracruz on a small yacht called Granma, G-R-A-N-M-A, and began the Cuban Revolution, which, as one who believes that was one of the better things that ever happened in the world, I was amazed at it. They had to, it's swamp, it's horseshit. There's snakes and those weird little crocodiles that live in the caimans that can crack a coconut with their bites. They had to get through that shit before they got to the bullets. It was amazing. Obi-Wan Kenobi. Bay of Pigs, I call it unexpected dangers. We know what happened there? Southmost point of the Caribbean, southmost point of Trinidad, the island of Trinidad, at a place that Columbus named Boca del Dragón and Boca, or and Boca el Serpente, the Bay of Dragons and Snakes, serpents, during a hurricane. From the northwestmost point of Trinidad, looking towards the mainland of Venezuela, there's a big arm that goes into the South Atlantic, well, if you could say the bottom of the Caribbean, called the Paria Peninsula. I'm looking at a thing called Promontorio de Paria, the point of the promontory. Columbus stood on this hill this island where I'm looking, and looked at this site and decided that he would go around to the left-hand side, and he did, and sailed to a point called Macuro, which became the only site that he ever stood on the continent, any continent of the New World. It's another one of those horrible drug places now, but amazing, again, hurricane. South or northeastmost points of Venezuela, over 4 days, same place. The bulge of Brazil is interesting. I like the way maps work. The hump of Brazil goes like this, and the hump of Africa goes like that, and there's this feeling that maybe they might have fit. I didn't know shit about geography and found that they did fit. It was an ancient supercontinent called Gondwana. Well, some hippie world, Jesus. I should have known. And paleogeologists found that the supercontinent of Gondwana broke up and split apart and formed South America, Africa, Antarctica, Madagascar, and Australia from a point now known as Cabo Agostinho and the hump of Brazil. I made this picture at the break point of the Great Hump during a wild wave experience where I was hit from behind by I'm 50 feet up, hit from behind by a wave whose impact sheared the camera off the tripod just as I made the picture. I had no idea what this looked like. And the tripod went over the edge, and I'm scrambling to try and not go over the edge, but to catch the camera, and yeah, fuck, this is the result. A place on the south, we're going towards the end of this bullshit now, it's good. The Argentines and Chileans share a border on the grand island of Terra del Fuego at a point called Cabo Espiritu Santo, the Cape of the Holy Spirit. God, I loved it. And got there, and it's always cold. And there was these giant 50-piece snowflake size. And the Argentines and the Chileans don't like each other, and I'm on the border. and they're pissed, and each of them on both sides have their little guns pointed at me, and you know, fuck, what am I doing? I've got a camera now, so one tripod, I'm under a dark cloth, I'm not going to do anything. I made what I thought was this kind of wonderful picture, most of which would have been the sort of 3/4 from the right, and God, and I did something. I bumped it while I hit the back. I thought, oh, I fucked it. And got home and found that this accident I had exposed the back became appropriate to Espiritu Santo. The southmost point of South America, Cabo Froard, in a force 8 gale. It's all the time storm there, looking south. Not quite the southmost point of all South America, but as close as I was ever going to get. Cape Horn in a polar cyclone, looking south on the edge. I thought, great, what a great place. I left the place in Chile. I found the only guy that'd take me had a 22-foot motorboat, fuck. And it was storming, and then it became a cyclone, and we're in the dead zone, as they say, and I got to the south end of the island, and I kept looking for the Horn. I thought, Jesus, what a great name. I'm going to make a picture of the Horn of Cape Horn. How wonderful. And then I finally found out that they named it after a Dutchman named Hornhuis. And of course, there's no horn. So that's the Horn of Cape Horn that doesn't exist. And I kept dreaming. I made this picture before the previous one. I kept, before the polar cyclone, which I called Polar Cyclone, the End of the World, I actually thought it looked like we were gonna, the boat was gonna sink, and it was a bad deal. I kept watching the wave pattern happen here. I thought, fuck, I can do this. I wanted so bad to get to Antarctica, I could taste it. Impossible, impossible. I watched this arrow occur, and I thought, wow. I've learned how to count waves. Not like surfers, I'm not that hot or good, but I can count. I can count waves. I know how to count. And I saw this repeat over and over. Underwater topography really matters. I thought, fuck me, I can do this. I can make this picture. This arrow is pointing directly towards Antarctica. I started obsessing. I spent 2 years solid between 2007 and 2008 in the polar regions, north and south poles. And I became as a result, doesn't mean shit to anybody but me. I mean, I'm the only artist in the world who's ever made pictures from both poles and both polar circles. It's not much of a distinction, but it means it's an amazing thing. And this thing that I call the wanderings from one circle to the other, I made at midnight on the North Polar Circle on the west coast of Greenland, and nearly 1 year later, minus 2 days, to the South Polar Circle on the little island called Bragg Island. By the way, the South Polar Circle is one of the hardest places. It's harder to get to the South Polar Circle than it is to the South Pole, for some weird reason, at midday, looking back towards each other. But the arrow was pointing to this island, Elephant Island. And I thought, oh my God, there's only 3 places that I know of, at least in the Antarctic world, where there is a land body that you can stand on that borders both the Drake Passage and the Southern Ocean. And this point on Elephant Island, called Point Lookout, there's only 2 access points. The other is Point Wild or Cape Wild, named after Frank Wild of Shackleton, and it's also wild as fuck to get there. I couldn't get there. Our dinghy was overturned in the crossing the bar to get to this, and then we were tracked by leopard seals, which is not a good thing. Leopard seals have learned that dinghies are inflatables. You can bite them and they'll sink, and then you can have your lunch.
15 minutes.
Thank you, I'm almost there, funnily enough. The northmost point of the continent of Antarctica, from behind, Prime Head Point, looking at the Antarctic Strait. I'm happy about 3 things in my work, particularly, or actually 4 things. I was out so long, I discovered, if you could say, 3 new GPS sites for the continent of Antarctica. The Hydrographic Board, which are difficult people, have agreed that it's new knowledge, and I've added knowledge to the Antarctic pilot. This is one of them. It's called Catherine Island, and it's just in front of Prime Head Point, the northmost point of Antarctica. This is the second one. It's called Lisa Rock. There's a rock that has sunk facing Cape Herschel after John Herschel. Sunk about 4 or 5 boats, but nobody charted it. I'm standing on it, having charted it, and then making a picture at the rock face. This is just, I was out the last trip, 89 days. It was sunny once. This was that day. There's a phenomenon that I don't know what it's called. There's a couple of hydrographers amongst you that, where at a certain temperature that's really cold, freezing, you drop something in water or throw it with some force, and it kind of like electric zigzags happen going down, sort of like reverse ripples. And that's what happened. I threw a chunk of ice in the water because I thought maybe I was in the right temperature. And that shadow, weird shit, is me on a rock. It's kind of, I loved it. The northmost point of the continent of Antarctica is the hardest place, I think, in the world to get to. I say this simply because there are only 10 people in the world that have ever gotten there, and I'm number 9. More people have stood on the face of the moon. One of the few good things I perhaps have done in my life, I forced my captain, by claiming ownership of the boat as the charterer, which wasn't a good deal, to agree that we would try, if humanly possible, to pull the boat behind us and take the dinghy and do a chart reading into Prime Head on all sea charts, and especially the pilots, but those of you, there are in dangerous areas in capital red letters, often with a red arc, sometimes with a red line, things called uncharted dangers. If you go into an area that's officially designated as uncharted dangers and you find yourself in trouble and you radio for Mayday, nobody has to involuntarily come after you because you did it to yourself. And more importantly, if you hurt your boat, Lloyd's refuses to insure you. We spent 3 weeks trailing the boat from the Bransfield Strait into this site, and became 9 and 10 to actually reach the northmost point of the continent of Antarctica. South Pole looking north. South Pole looking west. Polar whiteout. I'll read something, we're almost done. The South Pole is 10,000 feet of ice on a 2,000-foot bit of bedrock, so you're at approximately 12,000 feet. Prime Head ice wall is 250 feet of ice. The peculiarity of arriving at the South Pole first and then finally getting to the northmost point of the continent was extraordinary. This strange forever iced island that's huge, continent, somehow did change me forever. I want to talk about something and then we'll move towards the end. I encountered over 23 days a continental-wide snowstorm that closed Antarctica, the entire continent, down for 23 days. In the base camp to our approach to the pole, we were stuck, everybody, the sportsmen, the scientists, everybody. Everybody that could found whatever shelter they could. 23 days is a very long time, by the way, to spend in a tent, in a sleeping bag with 60 to 80 mile an hour wind. It's so cold in Antarctica, it almost never snows. But for 23 days, 60 to 80 miles and horizontal snow. After day 13, I thought, fuck, I can't stand this anymore, cabin fever. I have to try and make a picture. So I asked 7 people, so that's what I figured it would take. 3 to hold me, 3 to hold the tripod, and 1 to hold the dart cloth. And I set up and looked into the horizontal whiteout and made this picture. I was so proud of it. I started to dream, about being at the furthest places, absolute in the world, during the darkest times of light. I don't know, can this go off somehow? I'll read something. This is the first dreaming. The North Pole at midsummer's night, midnight, at the winter solstice. This and its sister, which I've screwed up because I couldn't see the picture properly, which is in this case the same picture. It was supposed to be the South Pole at the winter solstice, the South Polar solstice at midnight. And when I made them, and this is actually called polar blackout, that's what happens. And I thought this was the right place to read the second to last thing. The Maori have a creation myth, and it's about sound and light, so it makes sense. I tried reading the Maori once, and it's fucking tongue twister. I'll read you the English. The void, the first void, the second void, the vast void, the far extending void, the sere void, the unpossessing void, the delightful void, the void fast bound, the night. The hanging night, the drifting night, the moaning night, the daughter of troubled sleep, the dawn, the abiding day, the bright day, space. I've learned how to try and be a human being by failing for nearly 30 years to do something that seemed impossible. I had this idea that I could circle the globe in less than 10 years and talk about the philosophical content of what makes us humans as Westerners. Horseshit. Couldn't get near. I learned my greatest lessons through the several, about 12 moments of most extreme physical and mental danger that I've ever come across. I have learned to be fearful. I've perhaps always been frightened, but fearfulness is something different. The Northwest Inuit people sing to their children, and a Danish Greenlandic ethnographer named Knut Rasmussen collected the songs and sayings, much like the Carmina Gadelica, of all of the 8 or 12 Inuit tribes from around the top of the world. And he annotated this thing. The guy that wrote it was, or that said it, was a shaman named Awa. And he said, "We do not believe, we fear." I thought, fuck, what's that about? You know, beliefs kind of keep the heart going when everything else go to hell in a handbasket. And then, if you will, I was out so long, and perhaps so far, that I began to think about it. Beliefs are like a Band-Aid. They cover the bad shit up, but they don't change the bad shit at all. They just cover it up. Fearfulness, which is what he's talking about. We fear. As humans, we're animals. Animals in the world, in this case, what I call the far field. And Awa was teaching his people, believe what you need, because we need that cover. But if you're not fearful, and you don't keep your eyes wide open, perhaps preternaturally, you will, of course, be killed more or less instantly, because the world is like that. We are literally here today, and maybe not even longer. But when I learned for me what I think this meant, my fright disappeared. The uncertainty, I had to learn how to try and explore. I don't know how to do this. I'm not Hamish Fulton or Richard Long. Fuck, I can barely walk. You know, they're giants. But I needed to do something the way I knew how to do it. And I style myself now an expeditionary artist. I may be the only one, not that that matters. I had to learn how to sleep outside in tents, which is not so difficult, but then, you know, bathrooms, fuck, man. I don't like camping. I love bathrooms, showers, toilets, beds, food. I learned how to live with extreme cold. The South Polar pictures were at -77, which Fahrenheit, which coincides very closely to -44 Celsius. I learned, because there was no choice, how to not allow my frights to scare me so much. And it was a good thing. I learned how to be fearful. And it changed everything in my life for the better. Not quaking, bullshit. Just to keep my eyes open. Try and stay awake. Be careful. You'd never know it. Be quiet. Look hard. I distinguish between looking and seeing. Looking is a sort of thing, happens like breathing. It's an autonomic activity. Seeing is an act of consciousness, and I am really most interested in that act of all things. So this is the end. After all the bollocks, this is what it comes down to. I like the New Yorker. I'm kind of devoted to it, and I read their cartoons, and I thought, this is perfect. The hot dog salesman is talking to a customer. You know, that's my studio, you know, where I work on the hot dogs. And I thought, fuck, that's it exactly. I work every day now, 7 days a week, printing in the field. I almost never do anything else. I've got projects going for some time, touch wood. And I think of them as my hot dogs. Sometimes I make really good hot dogs. Sometimes my hot dogs are horseshit, and you shouldn't touch them. But every day I make hot dogs. And each day I go into the studio, whether it's the studio of the field, the outdoors, the near field, the far field, the studio of the dark room, the studio of the studio, and think about making work 7 days a week through the clock. I get better at making hot dogs. It's a very, very, very modest accomplishment, but it makes me feel good. Thank you very much for allowing this.
Okay, yes, vice versa. Tom and I haven't been together for a few years, and when we were together in the early days, that he refers to in the 70s. Remember the 70s? Anyway, the 70s, he was just new over to this country. We won't go into how he got into the country, but he wouldn't get in again.
How true.
Yeah, and I took him to one or two places in my native county at the time, Shropshire. We were both living in Derbyshire because we were teaching at Trent Polytechnic at the time. And over the border, by gum, all day it took to go to Wales. We went to Wales. And now,
Darkest Wales.
Now, a day to take all that travelling, and now we circumvented the bloody Atlantic Basin. Yeah, and it all started then, didn't it?
I know, it's all your fault. I blame everything on you.
So it's wonderful. Anyway, one of the ideas that we had, apart from going out and having a good time, occasionally taking pictures and chewing the fat, and teaching a lot of kids who have now gone on to various high spots in their lives and careers, and sadly some of them no longer with us, but hopefully that's how it goes. Is that we thought, well, is there a difference between an American aesthetic in photography and a European one? God, we were thinking theory then, and so what we decided to do.
The T word doesn't come often and easily in my life anymore.
Yeah, we're all theoreticians at heart. But the thing is that we thought, well, how would we find that out? If possible, we could debate it. We wanted to bring something back for our students also, as a way to sort of contribute to that sort of debate that we were having amongst ourselves. And we would go and interview American photographers and European photographers. Where would they be? Some of those, we thought, well, Paris. That's yeah, Paris. Yeah, there's Paul Strand, just lives outside Paris. Henri Cartier-Bresson lives in Paris. Jacques-Henri Lartigue also, and Brassai. And he comes originally from Hungary, so I mean that's good. Yeah, okay. Well, have I missed anybody out? That was
no. Paul, this is a blank. I follow you like a dog.
Man Ray. Oh, yeah, so American. So we thought we'd go over there, and we first of all we had a friend who was Jacques-Henri Lartigue, not Jacques-Henri Lartigue. Jean-Claude Lemagnier, God, and he was a curator of photographs at the Bibliothèque Nationale, and we knew him, and he gave us their addresses, and anyway, we went over one weekend. We had some French students over there, a couple of them would help us with the translations and so forth, and so we fixed up. First of all, we went to see Paul Strand. Great, we arrived there, fantastic, wonderful guy. His wife was wonderfully hospitable. He wasn't in the most brilliant of health, but he had all those sort of connections going right back to Stieglitz and, you know, the 19th century, and Louis Hine and so on and so forth. And we were meeting this great icon of photography, and so we started off. And he said, "What do you want to do?" And we explained it, American aesthetic and British. I said, "I don't know what you mean." He said, "We were bumbled on with the questions." And he said, "You know, this hasn't got any form." And
it straightens your back like a rod, you know.
So I went back to my journalistic background mode, think, oh God, you know, we can't lose this opportunity. He's probably right. Let's start off with the beginning. You know, how do you? And when was your what was your first camera, and when your first photographs and things like that, and sort of made it up on the wing, which of course we've been doing ever since. And so that's how that started. And the other thing that happened, and he helped give us that form, so that's the form it became, and with certain key questions that we asked every interviewee. Subsequently, and the book has actually been in print continuously since 1979, which is it'll be 40 years next year, which is miraculous. And the other person that one of the other people we went, there was no problem with Jacques-Henri Lartigue. Brassai was a complete disaster because we lost our interpreter on that one.
Well, and then there were the plates.
Yeah, and the plates. The plates?
Wasn't it Mrs. Brassai?
Oh, Brassai.
You said Brassai.
Yeah.
They were having a small marital altercation.
Yeah.
And as we knocked on the door, breakage was occurring on the other side.
Yeah.
And you wonder whether it's wise to proceed.
Yeah.
Paulie, of course, is brave beyond belief. And then we went on.
Yeah, the other person we wanted to see, we hadn't got a reply from, was Man Ray.
That was brilliant.
And so we knew which his address was, so we went to his address. We thought, well, shall we go in? No, right, okay, we'll give him a ring from the bar below, because his flat was above this bar in Paris, and sort of had a film. I spoke to him, and then he said, "No, I'm not giving it. No, I don't do interviews. I'm too old. I'm doing it there." And
he was 86. So.
Yeah, and then he proceeded to actually say what he was up to, what he was doing. So I knew he wanted to talk to somebody about it, which was fantastic. And so we said, "Well, can we come along and just shake your hand and say hi and hello?" And he said, "Oh, okay." So we went there. His wife let us in, and you know we carried on the interview there.
Paul, there's another small salient detail. Dear old Man Ray was smoking a hash cigar the size of a Cuban thing, and was in perhaps a remarkably salubrious mood
mellow. I think is the word. Yes. And so that's how we started. And then we continued over the years. We financed it through some contributions from the Polytechnic where we were working. Meagre those were.
So good, Paulie.
And also we went over to the States and did some lecture engagements at the Society for Photographic Education, and went to some universities there, and we met some other photographers there, and people we interviewed, like Ansel Adams and Elliot Porter, Laura Gilpin, and Imogen Cunningham and people like that. I mean, people, we did actually say, and it's rather distasteful to say this, we thought, well, we'll get these people before they croak. And which
never more pertinent than today, I have to say.
But so that was, so there was a time factor involved. Obviously, we had to move fairly quickly, but we did. So that was, you know, we did that quite successfully. But one of the other ways it was financed, it was very fortunate. Tom had gone to see the editor of Camera magazine, if you remember that, Swiss Camera, came out of Lucerne. It was in 3 languages. And he was an American, Alan Porter, very interested in taking these interviews, which Tom obviously mentioned when he went to show him his work. And so as a result of that, he said, any interviews you do, I'll publish them. So, and then you'll get paid.
Sight unseen, unheard of.
Yeah. And I'll pay. And so that's, you know, it wasn't a shitload of money, but it kept us going. And
exactly
then,
right.
and then we had, Tom met up with 1 or 2 publishers when he went back to the States, including Nancy Marsalis, who was Susan Marsalis' sister, who was the editor at Farrar, Straus and Giroux. And she really loved it and said, right, we'll take it, and gave us a nice advance. But she
the
said,
one and the only.
We should have about, you know, we had about 15 then, 13, something like that. She said, I think 20 is a good round number. You know, so we, at least with the advance, we were able to get that number up to about 2023. So that's it in a nutshell. Do you want to answer the question?
I'm just gobsmacked, Polly. For whatever reasons, and I'm beginning to understand why, I've erased most of this. You're the only one that knows. I don't know shit anymore about any. I have forgotten all of it. So I followed Paul all my life while we've worked together. So it's Mutt and Jeff. I'm the dog. He's the walker of the dog. And it's turning out to be the same thing now. I can't remember any of it.
Well.
Although there are two interviews that are done but not transcribed, and the last Lizette Modell interview, and William Edgerton, William, the scientist. William Harold Edgerton. Thank you. That at some point maybe we could get transcribed and put in a new edition.
And Tom did some of these on his own. He did, he was very brave. And he did 2 or 3 on his own because he was back in the States when we had a deadline, and I was in the UK, so we had a deadline to meet with and he interviewed Kurt Tesch and Eugene Smith. And then Robert Doino. Those are the only 3 that we didn't do it together. And what we tended to do, being my journalistic background, was sort of keep the questions rolling. Tom did the research before and the reading, because he, having done an MFA at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, and being taught by the great Beaumont Newhall, photo historian, Tom knew his photography history, and obviously that came into it, and it was very useful to me also because I learned so much, not only from doing this project, but obviously working from Tom, who was passing on a lot of information that had been passed on to him, and he learned and read about when he was a master's student in Albuquerque. So it was a win-win situation all the way around, and it's still in print, so we still get a few bob occasionally.
And it's in print. This really has to be said. Maybe I got the first thing going, but Paulie's kept the book alive, and that's amazing to me. I'm one of these people that don't have the mental strength to continue too many things, and didn't then. We talked at some point about volumes, 4 volumes of this book, and I started to lose the will to live at a certain point. But really, I came here as a naive, sort of flabbergasted, and now I'm just flabbergasted and fucked, but instead of naive. Paulie sounds sycophantic. I never met anybody before that had the public face that Paulie has. And he was kind to me, I'm awkward to be around even at the best of times, and really, truly, I benefited world class. I was bursting with stuff to try and do and think and say, and not unlike Paul Strand, and I mean this sincerely, and that's one of the things I want to say. Paul helped me find the form, find the way to say and do what I wanted to do. And in some lives, like mine, there is never enough, and I really mean this, never enough gratitude. I finally said yes to Tim's kindness because he said, look, Paul's going to be here. And it's like this fucking hook. And here I am. He reeled me in. Glasgow, long goddamn line, by the way.
Yeah. For those who didn't appreciate Tom's presentation, you've got me to blame, sorry.
It's true, it's all him, all his fault. And it's a joy. I'm so proud of that book. It may not seem, when Paulie mentions that it's still in print next year, it's 40th year, it's in 4 or 5 languages, including Chinese, which is amazing.
And Russian. And
Russian and Japanese and Spanish. Fuck, I'm really happy about that. And the Chinese, so I'm told, actually paid instead of pirated the edition. That was pretty nice. It paid tuppence halfpenny, but they paid. But what I'm trying to get at is, this man made it happen. Ideas are relatively easy to come by. Have to find somebody that can activate them. And this man's tremendous ability in the public zone, because I can't do it. He's being understated, you know. It's easy to do what I know how to do. He did it. I can't do that shit. I had to be, Tim pointed a gun at me and said, after I said yes, and if you don't show up, this is not what I do, but by God, what a treat. And it's been, I think, is it 8 years since I've seen you?
6.
6, a long time, I can't count. But finding a partnership, working partnership, that's all I want to get at. In my work life, being generally inclined towards the solitary, it's easy to do stuff by myself, and I'm comfortable with it. Finding somebody that you trust, that you like, and through difficulties will put up with your bullshit, and still allow you to be whoever you are, that's unusual in my experience and rare. We've been a good team. That's pretty nice.
Tim, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, well, as a team, I'm interested in, you've obviously got some characters in the book there.
2 or 3.
I'm interested in particularly who was the most difficult stroke entertaining, because I'm looking at Minor White on there and thinking, he could be quite difficult to get sense out of.
He was a peach.
No. Minor White, there's a misconception of Minor White. I mean, Minor White was always warm, very open, very jokey. One sort of downside about him, I mean, from his own point of view, was the fact that he consumed a bottle of Harvey's Bristol cream every day. But you know,
that we had to pay for.
But no, he was a delight. There was a Helmut Gernsheim was. The historian was really quite strange because we had a really good interview. He talked about, you know, how he'd met his wife Alison in a nudist colony, which we thought was quite a good line. We thought it was very good, and put that in.
Come
and
see my etchings.
And so there was a lot of sort of quite. He expressed himself in a very sort of relaxed, informal way, but for him it wasn't perfect English. So this 5-hour interview, which was long, he actually rewrote it with the questions in what he thought was good English, and of course it was pretty stilted, as these things tend to be. So you know, that was that. The Man Ray story we've told you about, which was quite interesting. Does anybody know who that is? I mean, that's Tom and I, if you can recognise us. It's a snap. But does anyone recognise who we're interviewing? Anybody? No? Pardon? No.
I can't see it, so I can't
it's up there.
recognize
It's on the monitor.
Sorry?
There.
I'll be
there it is, there.
I still can't recognize it.
Yeah. It's Jacques Anglais-Lati.
Ah!
Yes. So, yeah, you were there, Dom.
I'm the guy on the floor.
Because if...
I definitely was there.
Yeah. Nothing exists unless it's photographed, so we've got a photograph.
Yes,
it does exist.
I was there. I definitely was there. God, it's amazing.
You know, to answer your question, Tim, can you think of anybody who was...
for me, Eugene Smith. Well,
yeah, I wasn't there.
I mean, that moment that I had with Smith was again. Paulie and I did think about, you know, see them before they croak, and it got to be humorous after a while because we missed 3 or 4 that we'd hoped to see that died before we could get to them. But Smith was dying, and it was a wild thing. It was really sweet. incredibly intense, and the last interview that he gave, and for me, is a moving thing. Just that, you know, when an old guy is in his hospital bed surrounded by his wife and his manager, and he's holding your hand and squeezing it, and you think, wow, shit, should I be doing this? This guy's on the way out, and I'm messing with his last minutes here. What it turned out, he lived 3 or 4 more days, but I was just humbled down to the ground. I have a story. We went, my memory, I may be wrong, because boy, I've obviously repressed a lot of this. We went to see Cecil Beaton, and I really love Cecil Beaton. I think he's a greatly underrated picture maker, and there's some people I wish we'd also seen from the American side that did kind of what he did. I'm sorry we didn't see Avedon and others, but we went to see Beaton, and we weren't, obviously I didn't know he was rich. Sir Cecil, I should have gotten it. We weren't allowed in the front door, we had to go in the trade entrance. And I was just gobsmacked. His bin in the kitchen was held up by his 4 Academy Award-winning Oscars for the set and the stage designs for Gigi and... was it the toilet?
The toilet, yeah.
No, well, even better, the toilet for Gigi and My Fair Lady. 4 Oscars holding up the bin. And I thought, wow, we're in a league in the world that I didn't even know existed.
Yeah, that was really good, and he had a stroke, so he found difficulty in answering the questions. He could understand them, but he couldn't. And he had a menciosis, whose name I've forgotten. God, a wonderful woman, truly. And she knew what he was trying to say. So, in fact, you know, the answers to the questions came out of her mouth, which is rather strange. The other story, really, which is was Henri Cartier-Bresson, who rejected outright. We had a fantastic time in Paris, really good. They're very hospitable. He and Martine Frank, his wife, and they took us out to lunch and all the rest of it. The interview went well. He had 1 or 2 hissy fits, which he was prone to.
Paul's thinking, please don't say anymore. He's going to hit you.
And he got very excited in 1 or 2 places. Anyway, it was fine. So we did the transcription, sent it to him. He said, rang up, said, I cannot allow this to go in. I've made some indiscretions here, made some indiscreet comments, and
really opened.
No, how Magnum started is indiscreet. It's in the public, you know. But there were things he said about his the nature, his psychology, his psychological profile, if you like, in why he took what he did in the way he did because of his personality and so on and so forth. He didn't want to confront people. He ran away. All these things, really gold dust. And we thought, oh God, all that stuff's going to go, and how we knew this, dreadful story was we were doing a workshop. No, I don't think Tom was there. We were doing a workshop in the photographer's place in Derbyshire, which we set up in the 70s, and Angela, my late wife, came in and said, "Sorry, Paul, to interrupt you. This was while it was going on. The workshop was going on." Henri Cartier-Bresson's on the phone, you know.
As you do.
All the people said, anyway, went out and had this conversation in the middle of a workshop, trying to rescue our interview. And so I said, look, talking fast, said, well, can we take you, will you answer the questions? You know, we've got the questions here. He said, yes, okay, I'll answer them in my own way. So he answered the questions, and they came back. I never
knew this.
Yeah, fairly anodyne responses, but ones that basically everybody knew about. But it was only the 2nd interview he'd ever done, and that was published. And so we were really pissed off about that. But nonetheless, it was, that's how it went. And Ansel Adams was the same, because he didn't want to go in the first edition. And it was when our great editor, Nancy, and obviously a tough family, the Marsalis must have been, stood up to him, and his manager at the time, who was a politician who turned, who was an agent trying to make a career in politics. And he was Bill Turnage, that was his name, wasn't it? And he tried to, control everything, with Ansel Adams and the image and the price of his prints and all sorts of things like that. But Nancy faced him up and said, look, all that we in this interview is already in the public domain. So she faced him down, and Ansel Adams was obviously in the first edition. Henri Cartier-Bresson's anodyne interview was also there, but we'd got the transcript. So bless him, he was about the last of all the people. He was about the last
Whatever
of all.
it was, I'm sorry.
Yeah, he was about the.
It broke.
He was about the last of all the people we interviewed to die, and as soon as he did, we put the unexpurgated version in. So, so I mean, if you buy this edition as opposed to something on eBay from a few years ago, that interview is now in, and you'll please kneel.
Well, I was hoping we can take a couple of questions from you.
Oh, right.
Could we have the hands lights up for a second, please? Does anybody like to ask a question of Thomas and Paul about the Dialogue with Photography book? Somebody wants. Yeah. Ed.
If you were starting again, who would you choose to interview?
I know who I would.
I'll just repeat that question there. If you were doing the book now, who would be on in?
Well, the people we missed were unfortunately because of circumstances was Walker Evans. That was a big miss. We thought of Otto Steinert, and we thought of
Steichen. Steichen.
No, Steichen, he died.
No, he was still alive.
No, the guy in no, not Steichen. The other one.
There's so many of them.
Yeah, no, the other one in Hungary. No, Czech.
Czech.
Yeah,
Sudek.
Yeah, those are the people that we really
had access to.
met. And then the thing is that Ray Moore was a colleague of ours. Raymond Moore, if you know Raymond Moore's work, and he said, you know, because we thought we'd move on to the next generation, which obviously Ray was, you know, on that cusp, and he said, I'm not going to, because by time the book came out, or publication, nearly all the people we'd interviewed had died. So he said, I'm not going to be interviewed. No, I'm not going to. Oh no, kiss of death, kiss of death. So Ray would have been, I think, sort of, you know, one of my favourites, and I'm sure Tom's as well, being a British photographer.
I would have, and I this is a regret. For me, although the latter, I think, lose the plot stage, I would have had Robert Frank.
Yeah, Robert Frank. Yeah, that's definitely.
Because for me, Lines of My Hand is the breakthrough moment. Everybody I know loves, of course, the Americans, and I kind of do too. But Frank changed photography from a public medium to a personal medium with the publication of that book, and I mean, and subsequently its iterations, Flamingo and other things, and they're spectacularly important. And they confuse everybody even now, especially Americans who don't know how to deal with anything personal. Yeah. So shoot it. It's best that way. But
have we got another time for another question? I think. There we go.
It's all yours, baby. It's yours. It's yours. I actually remember.
Yeah. Why is the book called Dialogue with Photographers?
Talking about Helmut Gernsheim, this is another thing. He said, why has it been called dialogue? It's dialogue, surely it's dialogue with photographers, you know. Excuse my German accent, which is French.
And I will follow it up, so no worries whatsoever. I piss off everybody, so no problems.
Very racist. Sorry, Helmut. And
no, you're not. I'm not.
But it was the editor who helped, you know, kept us going, and that was Alan Porter, who he came up with the title. He did indeed. Editor of Camera.
Absolutely spectacular, and of course, grammatically, Gernsheim wasn't right. The dialogue as a conversation is with thought. And so you can carry on the dialogue with a person, and therefore the ers, or the thing which actually exhibits the thought, which is the medium. And we actually really thought about that and thought, wow, fuck, he hit it right on the bang head for us, that it's the medium we're talking about, and that the people that articulate the medium are the people that are making up the fabric of the dialogue, but it's how they use the medium that seem to be important, and therefore the dialogue with the medium, photography.
Fabulous.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, both Paul and Thomas.
Thank you.
Buy the book. Buy the book.
Yes.
Buy the book. It's upstairs.